I've actually been really curious all week to ask this question. Who here knows how to use a map, like paper map? Okay, probably more than half the room. Pretty impressive. You guys are better than I, if given a map, would probably be in more trouble than if I didn't have one. But when I was first learning how to drive way back in 2010, GPSs were kind of like a big deal. That was really, kind of a little bit of time before people started having them onto their phones. It was back when they had like the big, console that would be in your car who had one? Yeah, Garmin's, a few of you had them. Well, I remember thinking, great, I don't need to learn the roads. I'll simply just use a GPS. And it was my brother who was like, dude, don't use a GPS. You need to learn the roads around here. And so thankfully, I listened to him. I generally know Southeast Michigan. But shortly thereafter, they started programming GPSs on the phones. And so now everyone uses them for everything, right? That's just the way of the world. I've never been there before. Great, I'll just plug it into my phone. And so I, got an iPhone probably in 2013, 2014. So I've been driving for a few years and I started using Apple Maps. Apple Maps is terrible. It does not get you to where you need to go. At least it didn't used to. Maybe the Apple geniuses over at Apple got on with it and made a better app. But it used to be, the first handful of times that I used it, I remember following the directions. I remember them giving the step-by-step, here's how you get to where you need to go. And I would ultimately get somewhere where I didn't need to be. Right? It's okay, you've arrived to your destination, and I'm looking around thinking, there's no way that's where I'm supposed to be. So, you have to call somebody and be like, hey, I don't know why, but my GPS took me to a different spot. Maybe that's happened to you before. And then I had a loving friend tell me, Tyler, you don't use Apple Maps, you need to use Google Maps. And so I've used Google Maps from then forward, and I get to where I need to go everywhere and every time on time. And if I'm not on time, it's not the app's fault. So here's the reality is that the world's a lot like Apple Maps. The world tells us, here's the way, here's the direction, follow the steps. And here's the thing about Apple Maps is I genuinely trusted it. I genuinely thought that it would get me to where I needed to go. And so many of us will go through our lives trusting the promises of the world, that this is the way to life, and we will give our time, we will give our energy, we will give our resources to the end of what the world is telling us to. And we'll get there, we'll follow all the steps, and it won't deliver on what it's promised. It won't deliver on life and salvation like it promises. Those are just empty promises that have no ability to hold weight. And with all these different roads and ideas that tell us go here, go there, their only ability is to lead us not just to despair, but to death. The way of the world doesn't just lead to despair. It leads to death. And that's what we're going to see in the continuation of John's vision today. Is, hey, the end road, the end outcome isn't just that you end up feeling bad, but it really ultimately ends in death. And so if you'd remember back with me 2 weeks ago, there's 3 literary genres of Revelation. John acknowledges that in the first 5 verses. He says, this is a revelation, the Greek word apocalypsis, so apocalypse, apocalyptic literature is the first one. Then he says, hey, I'm writing a prophetic vision. And so there's prophetic literature, that's verse 3. And then verse 5 of chapter 1 is a letter to the churches. So we're dealing with 3 literary genres at play here, so there's some complexity. Chapters 2 and 3, letters to the churches. Chapter 4, I have a vision. And so apocalyptic literature comes into play. And what we know about apocalyptic literature is that it's heavily symbolic. And so if it's heavily symbolic, then we know that there's symbolism. And so when we look at these visions, we're seeing that there's symbolism at play that are meant to convey something that's real, a reality. And so the first vision, we're brought into the apocalyptic literature. John gets brought into the throne room. And he sees the creator God, and he sees the living creatures. He sees this picture of heaven and heaven's roaring of worship, and God is being praised as the king. And then chapter 5 comes, and he has a vision of heaven again. And in this vision, he sees God seated on a throne, and as he's seated on the throne, he's holding a scroll, and there's different schools of thought on what that scroll is, but generally speaking, it's God's plan for human history. Because what you'll see from Revelation 6 to 22 is you'll see judgment, you'll see salvation, and you'll see redemption. And so there's kind of this God story that's happening in Revelation. And that scroll was sealed. And John sees the problem of heaven, or so he thinks. Right? He sees a problem because, and this problems that he's seeing is he's saying, wait, we want to know what's in the scroll. Can somebody open the scroll? And heaven does a universal search, and in heaven and on earth and under the earth, no one was found worthy of opening the scroll. But John's looking around, he says, nobody's able to? Hey, Paul, man, you did a lot of great things. Can you open the scroll? Sorry, man, I can't do it. I'm not worthy. Peter? James, man, you were kind of related to Jesus. Can you open it? No, I can't open it. Moses, certainly you can, right? David, you were the man after God's own heart. Can you open the scroll? No one was found worthy to open the scroll. And John begins to weep when one of the elders comes and says, hey, look. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered, and he is found worthy to open the scroll. Heaven didn't really have a problem. Jesus, Aslan, was able to open the scroll. And so now he's having this continued vision, and the seal of the scroll is being opened, and what comes from what comes out forth from the scroll, these judgments that we'll see. What we can see is God's hatred for sin, that sin is going to have judgment brought upon it. And we'll see God's judgment on sin and God's ability to save and God's ability to redeem what sin has destroyed. But as the seal was broken open, John continues to see the Lion of the tribe of Judah open the remainder of the seals, the 7 seals. And coming forth from the scroll, we see these judgments, and that's what these judgments are meant to be, judgments. I mean, Revelation 6 to 19, you're going to see a lot of God's judgment on sin in the world. But what we will see is in these first handful of seals that get broken is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse get unleashed into the world. And though it's judgment, these horsemen, what they will do is they will portray themselves as heroes. These horsemen will portray themselves as something worth following. And ultimately, people will be deceived and people will be brought forth into God's judgment. And so these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, that's what they're often referred to, what we can see is that these are symbolic. Again, from chapter 1, this is the apocalypse. And so these are symbols that are going to teach us about realities. And here's what I want to say about these coming judgments that we're going to look at for these next handful of weeks. Is that these coming judgments, the war's already begun. I want to help you think about end times in a probably a more historic sense. But the war has already begun, and there's a great battle awaiting us. That think about end times, think about judgment that way. That the war has already begun, but we are headed towards a greater battle, a greater tribulation that Revelation speaks of. I mean, Revelation 6 to 19, all the judgments, some have referred to these as Daniel's 70th week. Some have referred to this period of time as Jacob's trouble. Others have referred to it as the Great Tribulation. And so when you think about Great Tribulation, we're going to be talking about a tribulation that occurs at the end of time. Like that's the great battle that's awaiting us, is this great tribulation, but the war's already begun. Remember that. Remember, Revelation is written to a specific people in a specific time, and it's for us today. But Revelation's always been needed. Revelation is not being preserved for the last generation that'll exist before the end times. Revelation is what we talked about week 1. The darkness and temptations that faced the church in Asia in the first century have existed all throughout time and history. And the call for us and the call for all of saints from all of history has been to remain faithful in the time of darkness and adversity and temptation. Right? The Revelation is not a new thing that's needed. Revelation has always been needed. Why? Because the battle has already begun. You're going to see that in Revelation chapter 11. Or Revelation 12. Revelation 12, I mean, what you're going to see was that moment that Jesus came to earth and the battle's beginning to start, where he began to stomp on our enemy. The war has begun. It is on. And so what we're experiencing right now is not new. Temptations and darkness in the present age is not new. Take a world history class. And when we're thinking about these four horsemen and we think about the horse of death and destruction and war, I to think about nation fighting against nation. Man, I'm thinking about the generations that were living through the world wars. I mean, they just had to be convinced this is it. Like every nation around the world's like getting involved in this thing. But the call, the command for us and for all of the church is that we would be found faithful through these challenging times. And as we've shared, the judgment we see playing out here in the text are present in our world. But these judgments, these horsemen, are going to only increase in their intensity and tenacity. Right? The conflict, the deception, the war, the death, the judgments of God are only going to increase. Like we have not and will never experience the volume of judgment that will be on the earth as when the Great Tribulation is upon the world. And maybe you wonder, hey, how can God do this? How can God unleash that level of judgment on the world and actually be good? It's Revelation 4 and 5 is the reason why he's allowed to. Revelation 4 and 5 sets the stage for the judgments that come in Revelation 6. What you see in Revelation 4 is as John gets this vision of the throne room, is that God is the creator God, that this is his creation and that it belongs to him. And then in Revelation chapter 5, we see that he is the God of redemption, that he is the lamb that was slain. Like he shows us his goodness, he shows us his heart, and he shows us his faithfulness. And so he is the one worthy that is able to execute judgment on the world. He is the one that's able to save us from sin, and he is the one that is capable of redeeming and restoring that which sin has broken. And so everything that gets unleashed from Revelation 6 and on is under his control. And again, it's these judgments that teach us more about Jesus. Because again, we're just taking John for his word. Revelation 1, this is a revelation of what? The end times? No. I mean, do we see that here? Yes. But this is a revelation of Jesus Christ, that everything contained in Revelation is to teach us more about Jesus. These judgments teach us about Jesus' view of sin, his hatred for sin and his love for us. I mean, this teaches us about Jesus. These judgments teach us about Jesus. And as we dive into Revelation 6, we're going to see that Revelation 6 mirrors Matthew 24. That these passages mirror each other. In Matthew 24, Jesus begins teaching about the end times, the last days, and the judgments that will exist. And when you mirror Matthew 24 and the words of Jesus to the picture that gets laid out for us in Revelation 6, you're going to see a mirroring. You're going to see so much similarity that they're talking about the same things. And the best way to interpret Scripture is with Scripture. That Scripture reinforces itself. And so let's dive in here. This is Revelation chapter 6, the first 2 verses. As I watched, so again, continuation. He's not saying, then I saw. He's not seeing something new. He says, as I watched. It's a continuation. The Lamb broke the first of the 7 seals on the scroll, and then I heard one of the 4 living beings saying with a voice like thunder, come. I looked up and I saw a white horse standing there. Its rider carried a bow, and a crown was placed on his head. He rode out to win many battles and gain the victory. Or better translated, as a victor to conquer. And exactly who this rider is has caused debate for millennia, and that's okay. I'm going to share some of the main kind of viewpoints of who the white rider is. Jesus, this is probably the most, it's probably the oldest opinion. This dates back to the church father Irenaeus in the late 2nd century. So, I mean, just like 200 years after Revelation, this was kind of an idea that people thought that this rider was Jesus. I don't personally hold that view. I have a difficult time thinking that there's an angel that's going to tell Jesus to come, and Jesus comes at the command of an angel. Some would think that the white rider is the advance of the gospel. Some would think that it's Apollo representing false religion. Some would believe that the white rider is the Antichrist. Some would view the white rider as the spirit of conquest. Others would view the white rider as government persecuting Christians. And lastly, some would view the white rider as Satan's servants in general. I tend to think that this white rider is in reference to the or a Antichrist. I think that's what you see in Matthew 24 as Jesus is talking about deception. And so we're just going to refer to this rider as deception. This rider embodies a counterfeit Christ, like an antichrist seen in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 or the beast of Revelation 13. Like this rider keeps company with war, famine, and death, which are the next 3 riders. And this rider fulfills the warning of Jesus in Matthew 24, 4-5, when he says to be on guard against deception and false Christs. This is all around us. This deception of false Christ and false salvation and fake roads we see in our everyday world. I mean, we see deception playing out in so many facets. We see it playing out in our political world, the political realm, and I'm saying that on both sides of the coin because I'm telling you, there's a lot of candidates, a lot of people that come out there, and they just know the red meat for their audience, right? They know how to say and speak about, oh, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do, and we're just like, you're going to lead us to the promised land. No political figure leads you to the promised land. Only Jesus does that. And so, we don't put our hope and we don't put our stock in Washington. We don't put it in the Oval Office. We put it in that throne room that John is speaking of. But so many tell you, hey, here's the way. Come and follow me. Put your vote in me, pledge your allegiance to me, and I'm gonna lead you to the promised land. And we don't just see this happening in D.C. We don't just see this with our politicians. We've also been deceived regularly by Hollywood, by our entertainment. Our entertainment, both visual and audio, both what we look at and what we listen to, there's an agenda. There is a way that they are trying to teach you and form you into a belief. But we oftentimes don't think of it that way. No, this 45-minute program is just existing to entertain me, to pass time, to kill time, No, that's not at all what's being taught. It's teaching you about sex. It's teaching you about finances. It's teaching you about time and energy. It's teaching you all about life. And it's forming and shaping our ideas of love. Man, I'm telling you, rom-coms are killing real intimacy. They're killing and destroying marriages because we have ideals of what a relationship is supposed to be. They get us to feel a certain way. Watch The Notebook. Is that what you want? I mean, it makes us feel all butterflies inside, and we're like, oh my goodness, they're like gonna go to bed and actually die together. And oh, look how he's just still showing up. But you watch the full journey, and it's teaching us about things. It's informing us, it's shaping us. And we don't say that's what we want, but when you look at statistically what's happening in our marriages and in our world, we're saying that's what we want. We're wanting options, we're wanting to play the field. And so there is a very clear intention of deception. And so when we understand that there's deception that happens in both our political world and in our entertainment circles in DC and in Hollywood, and you see that deception runs wild in these worlds, we get clued into the playbook. That deception has an intention, and it is to conquer. It is to destroy. And so we need to tune into the playbook. We need to be mindful of what deception ultimately does to us. And the question that I have is the thing that we have to wrestle with. Are we going to be rooted in what we know about Jesus Christ, or are we going to get blown away by every wind of new teaching and temptation? You see, my uncle's a state trooper for the state of Michigan, and I was just out with him the other night, and he's now like in these last few years, like he's the drop program, if you know anything about that, but he's essentially capable of retiring, but he's sticking around for the next few years. And he's been on the road his entire career. And now that he's getting older, he says, I wanted something a little bit slower, and he's hating it now. But he went to the casino. He's doing like a security detail at Motor City Casino. And he showed us a picture of 4 fake 20s that looked so real. Like, unless you do that marker to it, that their thing, you're not spotting that. And so I remember just looking at this and just thinking, that's the way of the world. It shows us something that looks so real. What Hollywood teaches us about life looks so real. It looks so appetizing. It looks so alluring. It's what the Apostle Paul says to Timothy in one of his final works. He says, in the last days are coming false teachers with lies so clever they sound like the truth. With lies so clever they sound like the truth. And so we all the more in the days to come, in the weeks and months and years to come, we have to be committed to knowing our word. We have to be committed to the Word of God. We have to know its validity. We have to know its truth so that we can spot a lie that's so clever it sounds like the truth. Because that's what we're told. Paul says it is clever, man. It can trip you up. It can trick you. And unless you know what's real, you won't be able to spot what's fake. And so let's be a people that are committed. I mean, this rider is meant to come in and really discern what's real and what's fake. This deception. It's going to allow us to determine what's real and what's inauthentic. And it will only continue to increase as the final chapter of history is written. Let's pick up in verse 3. When the Lamb broke the second seal, I heard the second living being saying, "Come." The other horse appeared, a red one. Its rider was given a mighty sword and the authority to take peace from the earth. And there was war and slaughter everywhere. This red horse we will call destruction. So the white horse was deception. The red horse is destruction. And while the rider deception tries to point us to life, tries to point us to salvation, it may even be able to offer prosperity for a time. But the red rider, or the red horse, teaches us rebellion against God will always, always, always lead to more than just despair, but towards death. That's what the Red Rider is going to point us to. Rebellion against God never wins in the long run. And don't we see that play out all throughout the Old Testament? Right? When the nation of Israel was deceived by the next shiny, beautiful thing, it always led to judgment. It always led to desolation. Right? They always got taken out into the wilderness. They always experienced judgment every time. And it was in Hosea chapter 11 where God says, the more I loved Israel, the more they rebelled. Right? They got deceived by the next pretty, shiny thing, and they said, well, that's what we're going to run to. That's what we're going to give our worship to. And they'd be deceived, and it never ended well for Israel. Prosperity never led them to real life. All it did was rob them of intimacy. And deception continues to trick humanity, and it continues to lead to the Red Rider destruction. However, this rider is not only has a mighty sword, but this rider's also been given the ability, look at the text, has also been given the ability to take peace from the world. Just utter chaos. And maybe you look around and you say, hey, the last few years, what we saw was riots and civil unrest and all these things. And there seems to be, a lack of peace slipping through the fabric of our world. I'm telling you, it's just going to continue to increase. We are not headed towards a utopia. No, again, these horsemen will just increase in intensity and tenacity towards that great tribulation. They're just going to increase. It's like what John is seeing here, this horseman that's able to take peace from the earth, is like a game of hide and seek, but peace is the one that's hiding, and peace is winning because it can't be found. Like that's the situation in the world during the Great Tribulation. And we're seeing more and more peace get lost in our world. This again is mirrored by the words of Jesus, Matthew 24, concerning the last days, Matthew 24:10. Jesus says, many will take offense, betray one another, and hate one another. That will exist in great volume during the Great Tribulation. It was during World War II where Albert Einstein had brought a photographer from Germany to the U.S. And while that photographer was here, he took many photos of Albert Einstein. They became great friends. And there was one day where the photographer is taking a picture of Einstein. And Einstein kind of took a moment to almost have this impromptu counseling session, and he just starts divulging what's going on in his heart and his mind. And Einstein began sharing about how troubled he was because of his own research and his finding that E equals MC squared. The fact that he figured out that formula and then shared his scientific research with President Roosevelt, and then the A-bomb was developed, and then he said, and thousands of people lost their lives because of what I was able to configure throughout a formula. And the photographer said as he was looking through the camera, looking at Einstein, Einstein began to look greatly troubled in his face, just dwelling on the fact that kind of what he had done, what he contributed to the world led to that. And the photographer looks at him and he says, so do you think that peace will never exist on the earth again? And Einstein's response was no, that as long as people exist, there will not be peace. And so we see that here in this Red Rider that God will use people to enforce and enact judgment on the world. And this form of judgment on the world is not new. Look throughout all of the Old Testament and see how God uses nation to rise up against nation to enact judgment on evil. That's going to happen. That's going to continue to happen. God will use people to rise up on people and use them as his instrument of judgment. And so he will do it again as the red horse of destruction rides, and time as we know it comes to an end. Picking back up, this is the third rider. When the Lamb broke the third seal, I heard the third living being saying, come. I looked up and saw a black horse, and its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard a voice from among the four living beings saying, a loaf of wheat bread or 3 loaves of barley will cost a day's pay, and don't waste the olive oil and wine. So we've had deception, we've had destruction, and now we have deprivation, the third horse, deprivation. Again, the deceiver promises the world, and the reality is those promises are empty. They're seen here in famine, seen here in the fact that people go hungry, where a person will work the entirety of a day and all of their toil doesn't do anything to give them the life that they were being promised by deception, but simply just for sustenance to get through another day. And I read this and wanted to share this information with you all about deprivation and famine. Famine and hunger kills more people every year than AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis all combined. There are people in our world that are starving to death, literally. Some 805 million people in the world do not have enough food to lead a healthy, active life. That's about 1 in 9 people. 1 in 9 people don't have enough food to live a healthy lifestyle. The vast majority of the world's hungry people are living in developing countries. It's not in first world countries, but countries that are developing, where 13.5% of the population is undernourished. Sub-Saharan Africa is the region with the highest prevalence of hunger by percentage of population, where 1 in 4 persons is undernourished. Poor nutrition causes nearly half of the deaths in children under 5. Poor nutrition is what causes the death in half of the children under the age of 5. 1 out of 6 children, roughly 100 million in developing countries, is underweight. This is what famine and hunger are like today, and it's only going to increase. It's only going to increase. It'll get much worse when the black horse rides. Lastly, the fourth horse. Verse 7, when the Lamb broke the 4th seal, I heard the 4th living being saying, "Come." I looked up and saw a horse whose color was pale green. Its rider was named Death, and his companion was the grave. These two were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with the sword and famine and disease and wild animals. Depending on your translation, it might just say that this rider was pale. But that word in the original language is more of a greenish, yellowish figure. It's like when you think like somebody that's sick, like that's kind of what you start envisioning, that greenish, yellowish figure. That's the color of the 4th rider. That's the color of the 4th rider in this vision. And so this rider ultimately is death. This is what deception leads to. Right? Like I said from the very beginning, the world is not leading us just to despair, but the world leads to death. Jesus speaks to this reality in Matthew 24 when he says that some who've been deceived will live lawlessly, and they're actually going to think that they're going to get away with it. Like they actually live that, hey, nothing bad is going to come from this reckless, wild living that is antithetical to the gospel. But in the end, when the Lord returns, when the manager returns in Matthew 24, it says that he will slice up the individual that's pillaging his house. Death does come. It's a reality. It is Romans chapter 6. The wages of sin is death. But the promise of Jesus in John 10 is that I've come to give life, and life more abundantly. Listen, I've sat under teaching in the past, in my lifetime, where the emphasis to get people to believe in Jesus was to literally scare them about hell. It was like, hey, let me tell you, I mean, this happened in like the 90s Sunday school classrooms. It was, hey, hell is this picture of lake of fire, and it's forever and ever and ever. And oh yeah, your mom and dad that are up in the big church, like, they're going to heaven. Where do you want to go? And it's like, is that really a question? But are we putting our faith in our mom and dad? Or are we putting it in the beauty of Christ? Give your mom and dad enough time, they'll fail you. Give your mom and dad enough time, they'll show you that they aren't worthy of your worship. They might be good and great people, but they will not sustain your soul. They will not offer you salvation for your soul. I'm sure some of you say, hey, you're getting a little touchy here, and others of you are probably ready to say amen to that, right? Depending on your upbringing. But as great as your parents could have been, they do not compare to the beauty of Jesus Christ. And so I'm not here to tell you how bad hell is. It's bad. The scriptures reveal the descriptors of hell, not a place somebody wants to go. But what I wanted to say this morning is that the promises of deception are death. They're not as shiny as the world is offering, and they pale in comparison to the beauty of Jesus Christ. It was Francis Schaeffer in his book, Death in the City, where he writes this. The dust of death is on everything. The dust of death is on everything. As the world's promises, the things of the world, though they show themselves as shiny and beautiful, there's dust laying on them, and the dust will continue to grow till a great day of the Lord. Nothing in this world can deliver on its promises. That's why Jesus says, don't put your treasure here on earth where moth and rust destroy. The greatest of your possessions are the things of future marketplace sales and dumpsters. The greatest things I heard this said the other day. Maybe you've put a lot of stock into your house. In 100 years, there will be people living in that house that you don't know. Or it'll get bulldozed. One of those two outcomes. And so we drive after these things. We drive after possessions like houses and cars. And I've never watched a U-Haul following a hearse. None of those things have infinite value. None of those things can deliver on salvation forever. And so as the dust grows thicker, it'll continue to grow thicker until God has accomplished his purposes. However, we don't need to fear or fret. Because why? Go back to how the vision started. God sits on his throne. His seatedness, if that's a word, tells us he is not worried or concerned about the judgments that are going to be living in our world. Because he knows he has more power and he's in control and he holds all authority in both heaven and on earth. We don't need to fret. We don't need to fear. Our great God, who offers us life and has accomplished that by laying down of his son's life, Jesus Christ. We've been given life now and forever. We can be fully, freely, forever forgiven. We can be released from the chains of death through an honest confession of our heart that we want Jesus to be Lord of our lives. You can have that. You can have that new life that's offered. And so let me pray for us.